Two football players lived in the same home in Texas and looked very similar to one another. One of them indecently assaulted young boys, and the other one got the blame and was sentenced to 25 years in prison due to the police detectives not investigating the case properly. 18-year-old Greg Kelly, the Cedar Park, Texas football star, on his way to a full scholarship, was found guilty of indecently assaulting two 4-year-old boys. Because Greg's parents had medical issues and could not drive, he was staying at the home of his best friend and teammate, Jonathan McCarty, who lived across the street from Leander High School. The two 18-year-olds had an uncanny resemblance. Greg was arrested in 2013, in his senior year in high school, based on an indecent abuse allegation by a 4-year-old child that was in the daycare at the McCarty home, run by Jonathan's mother. Greg was considered the only suspect in the case by the lead detective, Christopher Daly, although Jonathan was also living in the home, and there were other football players that also came in and out of the home. Detective Daly never went to the home where the assault happened. The police never stepped foot inside the daycare. The child described the room where the assault happened and the pajamas the man was wearing. The child said the man that assaulted him played football and his name was Greg. Daly's reasoning for not going into the home to investigate was that he believed the statement of the 4-year-old child in the CPS interview. By not going to the house, investigating the scene of the crime, and comparing it to the child's statements, he did nothing to prove that Greg did anything wrong, but he pushed on with the arrest and took the case to court anyway. The only testimony against Greg was the words of a 4-year-old boy who said someone named Greg molested him. However, nobody showed him a photo of Greg or asked him to visually identify his assailant. The authorities also never questioned others in the house at the time to see if it might have been someone else who looked like Greg or just called themselves Greg. Greg was not even living there at the supposed time of the incident. One of the boys who was allegedly assaulted testified that Greg did not do anything to him. Greg's lawyer, Patricia Cummings, never moved beyond her one strategy. She wanted to prove that the assault never happened at all. She said that if she introduced Jonathan McCarty as a potential alternate suspect, it would mean admitting that something happened. Her defense strategy was that the incident did not happen, period. Even after seeing all the evidence that could prove Greg's innocence, however, she still stuck to her original strategy. Even when a different route likely had a better chance of proving her client's innocence. There were also questions surrounding Cummings and her friendship with Jonathan McCarty's family, which made Williamson County District Attorney Sean Dick wonder if that was why she did not want to suggest that Jonathan might have been a logical suspect as well. This proved costly because she lost. It only took 12 hours of deliberations for the jury to find Greg, an innocent man, guilty of 2 counts of super aggravated indecent assault. The most shocking moment with Sergeant Daly and his interview with the second child was not the interview itself, which he later admitted was a leading interview with suggestive wording and leading questions. The biggest problem with this interview with the frightened child was the fact that the boy's parents purportedly never actually came forward to report any presumed indecent abuse. Rather, Sergeant Daly cold-called them and noted that indecent abuse was reported at their daycare and that he wanted to talk to the son. The parents were quick to oblige out of fear. Despite this leading interview and the fact that Sergeant Daly refused to investigate the supposed crime scene, he said later that he thinks he did a good job in the investigation and that he stands by the child's claims. That second boy testified in the court case and said Greg did not do anything to him, but it was not enough to save Greg from his original conviction. The daycare owner also testified and said she did not believe Greg did it. It was no secret that Greg and Jonathan, who had already been in trouble with the law, looked similar. So the fact that Greg was convicted based solely on a child's testimony and his name seems puzzling. The original case had almost no evidence, but in 2014, the courts convicted Greg of the crime and sentenced him to prison for 25 years with no chance for parole. But the case did not end there. If Daly went to the home to investigate, he would have learned that Jonathan actually owned the pair of pajamas the child said the assailant was wearing, and the room that the child described was the bedroom that matched Jonathan's bedroom, not Greg's. The fact that Daly chose not to go to the house to investigate and look around means that he had no idea the bedroom was Jonathan's. The police refused to question Jonathan, who was the man who actually did indecently assault the child. Instead, they made Greg the only suspect and allowed Jonathan to remain not investigated and around other children. Greg's girlfriend, Gabri Anderson, never gave up on him. They have been sweethearts since they were in grade school. She was willing to wait 25 years for him to get out of jail to be with him, and she never wavered in her love for the young man. Gabri completely believed in his innocence, no matter the circumstance, and she was there for him when he got out. Gabri got her devotion from her father, who also happened to be Greg's high school football coach. His coach believed in him so much that he cried while being interviewed and told anyone who would listen that Greg was innocent. Gabri's dad also helped bring in Jake Bryden, who helped get the case reopened. As for Gabri, she said, "I had no doubt in my mind. I knew what kind of person he was." Construction worker Jake Bryden showed up. He did not know Greg Kelly and did not know much about the case. He just knew that what he saw and read in the news about a seemingly innocent 19-year-old who was going to jail for a heinous crime he purportedly did not commit was wrong. Dubbing himself an activist, Jake called Greg's mother and started raising awareness to have the case looked at again. He said that all he knew was that Greg was dating his former coach's daughter, Gabri Anderson, and he believed in his coach's sense of character. Jake said, "I saw my old coach on the news. I know him to be a man of great character, and he was always our leadership teacher in high school and taught a leadership class. And I was like, why is he on screen crying for a convicted criminal?" When Jake got involved, he got the attention of people who could do something about it. He hired a private investigator to look into the case at the same time that District Attorney Sean Dick began to question its validity. Since the case was reopened, Jake did not stop fighting for Greg. Through dealing with her own illness, the illness of her husband followed by his demise in 2019, visiting her son in jail every weekend, and still being a mom to several other kids, the strength Rosa Kelly showed through the entire ordeal was incredible. When she got up to speak on behalf of her son, pleading for the officers involved in the initial investigation to be fired, it brought tears to viewers' eyes. Rosa Kelly believed in her son so much that she sold her home to help pay for his legal bills. While Greg's original legal team failed him, his mother kept helping as much as possible. Greg ended up spending 4 years in prison. In 2019, when Greg finally was exonerated and found not guilty of the crimes the original jury found him guilty of, she got her son back, and it seemed that all her faith, sacrifices, and hard work paid off. Jonathan McCarty was also a football player, but not as skilled. And presumably, he was not as good academically either. When Greg's case was reopened, McCarty found himself in jail for a probation violation on an illegal substance case for which he ended up sentenced to 4 years in prison. However, the most terrifying news came later when it was revealed that McCarty was charged with assaulting a woman in 2016. This past makes it shocking that the police never questioned McCarty and that Greg's attorney did not want his name mentioned in the trial. Greg and Gabri got married in 2019, with Jake officiating their wedding. Daly finally resigned from his position in 2020. Greg filed a lawsuit against the authorities who pursued the botched case and won a large, undisclosed settlement. The settlement was enough for him to pay back his mother, at least. He bought her a 1.3-acre piece of property in 2023. Greg said, "Since my release from prison, I had set up many goals to achieve, one of them being to repay my mother's sacrifice of selling her home for cash, so we could afford my legal representation. After I was exonerated, I always wanted to keep her close." After his exoneration, he wanted to get his life back together. He enrolled in the University of Texas Business School's entrepreneurship program. He also invested money in his brother's trucking company and runs a small business that makes targets for axe throwing. He soon changed majors to kinesiology, hoping to use that to remain connected to athletics after losing his chance to keep playing himself. He has become an advocate for criminal justice reform. Finally, he started to get involved with the Eastern Michigan University's football program, hoping to rekindle that love. Despite all the bad things that happened to him, it seems that Greg Kelly has finally come out with a bright future ahead of him. Jonathan McCarty would likely not be charged due to a lack of evidence, but he has admitted to the crime to his friends. For 34 years, a blaze at the Old Everett Community College library that took the life of a firefighter was a mystery. The person responsible has finally pleaded guilty in court. On February 16, 1987, the Everett Community College Library in Snohomish County, Washington, was destroyed in a fire. 48-year-old firefighter Gary Parks sadly lost his life in this fire. The library was essentially a two-story tinderbox with more than 48,000 books and 20,000 periodicals fueling the flames. The damage neared $10 million, but no one dwelled on the money. By far, what mattered most was the tragic end of the firefighter. Early that morning, an Everett police officer radioed in that he could see flames shooting 40 feet high from the EVCC campus. More than 100 firefighters descended on the college, with Gary among the first to arrive and enter the building. Gary and 5 other firefighters were cut off by a wall of flames that flashed up behind them, blocking their retreat. The fire made its move when the crew was well inside the library and running dangerously low on air. They had earlier broken with policy and decided to remain inside, while sending a couple of firefighters back to retrieve fresh air tanks. The fire not only stood between the team and safety, but it also filled the building with toxic smoke so thick that it blocked out light. Those who survived were buddy breathing, sharing the last gasps of air left in their tanks as they crawled outside beneath the worst of the flames, using the fire hose as a guide. Gary, a fire engine driver, was an 18-year veteran of the department and one of its most popular people. Balding with a bushy mustache, Gary, or also known as Parksy, was known for his energy, his love of family, his enthusiasm for sailing, and his mastery of firehouse pranks. Gary lost his life due to smoke inhalation. More than 800 fire and police officers attended a memorial service for him. The investigation into the fire swiftly determined that the EVCC fire had been deliberately set. That meant the firefighter's demise was due to a planned crime. The Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms sent a special team to Everett. Agents joined arson investigators from the city's police and fire departments in combing the ashes for clues. They had no luck, and the feds left after a few weeks. Before the year was out, Everett police leaders spoke openly about having exhausted all of what they considered the viable clues. As time passed with no arrests, those who loved Gary made certain he was remembered. Every year for more than a decade, firefighters and family would gather in the February chill at the EVCC campus and tell stories about the good man who was gone. There was a flurry of public activity 6 years later, in 1993, when suspicion turned toward an advertising executive from Linwood, who also was a serial arsonist. Paul Keller was revealed as the person using flame to terrorize people living around Puget Sound. In the span of a few months, he set dozens of fires at churches, businesses, and homes, sometimes more than one in the same night. After he was captured, he admitted to several arson cases. Keller had grown up in North Everett. He publicly became a suspect in the EVCC fire after his family told investigators that in 1987, Keller had lived across the street from the college. Through his attorney, Keller over the years steadfastly denied involvement in the EVCC arson. He also refused to talk with the detectives. The detectives confirmed that Keller had lived in an apartment across from the college, but they did not disclose that his residency came well after the library burned. Claims that he was spotted at the fire scene the next day also were not corroborated with hard evidence. A shift in the EVCC arson investigation came in 2003 when Wally Friesen, then an Everett police detective, was assigned to take a fresh look. He began by listening to tapes of emergency radio traffic from the night of the fire. The anguish in the firefighters' voices reached across the years, he later said. He was not alone in wanting answers, for Gary and for the people who loved him. The files at the time contained information on more than 50 people who over the years had been suggested as potential suspects. Each needed to be looked at anew. The evidence also needed a fresh chance to speak. The fire started in papers and books piled on the floor near a book drop inside the library. That meant it almost certainly was set after the building was emptied for the night. But who would break into a library? Why? And what purpose could be served by setting the place on fire? The EVCC arson seemed a senseless and stupid crime. Friesen asked, "Who does stupid crimes?" His best answer was, "Kids." Friesen retired in 2011, and the investigation passed along to capable hands. For more than 3 decades, the detectives in the Everett Police Department kept close by a black and white portrait of Gary. Inside the frame, the firefighter is wearing his formal dress uniform and a thin, yet friendly smile. His ever-present image at the police station was a nudge to carry on. The detectives would meet his gaze and know they must continue their search for answers, no matter how long it took. Detectives Jim Massengale and Mike Atwood developed a reputation as partners who built solid cases through hard work. Atwood worked the EVCC fire with Massengale until his partner left the department to take a job with another agency. He, too, listened to the emergency radio traffic from the night of the fire. He re-examined work done on all the suspects. He concluded that there was a strong circumstantial case that the fire was set by the teens who had first come under suspicion years before. He went looking for evidence. A key break came in April 2017. Atwood was at the Snohomish County Jail in Everett to assist a federal agent in questioning a suspect in an explosives case. That man already had posted bail and was gone. While standing at the booking desk, Atwood said that he recognized Elmer Nash, who by then topped his list of suspects in the EVCC arson. Nash was waiting to be booked. Atwood knew Nash from repeated encounters involving street crimes over the years. Atwood decided to try to get the suspect to talk. He knew he was taking a risk. He said, "In my mind, I am thinking, if I play this card right now and it comes out to nothing, I am going to be back to square one." Atwood asked Nash if he was open to delaying his booking for a few hours. He had something that he wanted to discuss. Atwood recalled, he said, "The EVCC fire?" I almost fell over. I said, "As a matter of fact, yes." The man agreed to talk so long as they could pick up a cheeseburger on the way to Everett Police Headquarters, so they stopped by a McDonald's. At the police station, they went to an interview room and a camera was set up, but Nash fell asleep. It appeared that he may have been using illegal substances earlier. As much as he wanted to press on, to seize the momentum of the unplanned encounter and the suspect's willingness to talk, Atwood knew there was only one responsible thing to do, so he took Nash back to jail. Atwood said it made him nervous, letting him walk away. He worried the connection might be broken and the opportunity lost. The next day, Atwood went back to the jail for another try. Nash again agreed to talk. The man, at first, denied any role in the fire and said he could not remember much from so long ago. That went on for a while. Then Atwood asked him if he was willing to submit to a polygraph, and Nash agreed. Detective Karen Kowalczyk took over while Atwood monitored via video nearby. Nash had some questions for Kowalczyk. He wanted to know what the statute of limitations would be for somebody who set the 1987 fire. Kowalczyk had questions too. She said it would be important for her polygraph test to know whether Nash had another connection to what happened at the college library in 1987. He told her that he had been on the roof of the library the night it burned. Kowalczyk had more questions. At one point, while talking about arson, she gestured with her hand as if using a lighter. Nash said it was not like that. He said with his own mouth, "matchsticks." The matchstick statement was significant because it tracked with the vision reported by Nash's teenage friend years ago. That person claimed his vision was of a blonde-haired kid lighting the library on fire using wooden matchsticks. Nash reportedly performed poorly on the polygraph. The detectives agreed Kowalczyk should continue with questioning. After about 45 minutes, Nash told her he was on the library roof that night because he and two friends had broken in, hoping to find something to steal. Nash agreed to talk some more with Atwood. They moved to a different room, the video cameras still active. Atwood said he needed to know more about the break-in, including how the teens got inside the library. Nash initially said he did not remember. They fenced a bit before details were offered. The man wanted to negotiate, at one point saying he would admit to breaking into the library, but not to setting the fire. Atwood believed that the fire was set to destroy evidence. The burglars feared leaving fingerprints. Atwood told Nash that was ridiculous. The library was visited by hundreds of people each day. Fingerprints were everywhere. Atwood recalled the suspect saying, "We were 13 years old." Nash initially claimed his partners in the break-in set the fire. Atwood told him that would not cut it. A long time had passed, and many were waiting for truth. The Parks family, the firefighters who narrowly escaped, the people who then worked at the college, and the people who had long worked the case. As he talked, Atwood texted his boss, Gerard Irving, now captain overseeing investigations for Everett Police. He wrote, "Bring me Gary Parks." Irving carried the framed photo of Gary that had hung on the wall in the detectives' offices for years. Atwood showed the suspect the photo and said, "That is the firefighter. That is Gary Parks." Nash has a child, a girl who lives in another state whom he rarely gets to see. Atwood began talking about one of Gary's two daughters, someone he has come to know during the investigation. He spoke of the void in her life from losing her dad. He said that was true for everyone who knew Gary. Atwood said, "I told him, I know you started that fire." And something moved. He looks at me and he says, "Mike, tell his daughter that I lit this fire, and I did not mean to hurt her dad. You tell her I lit it, and it was an accident." Nash is quoted in court papers as saying, "I never meant for no one to get hurt. I was 12 years old, and I was just being a dummy, being stupid, was not thinking." Nash began to cry. It appeared he had been holding that in for a long time. The April 2017 interview provided some answers about the EVCC fire, but it did not close the case. By the next day, the suspect already was backing away from his recorded statement. He told the detective that he refused to go to prison for a crime he did not commit. Everett Police had more work to do. There were dozens of witnesses to track down. Atwood said that he has interviewed everybody in that case who is still alive. Memories of that time had faded for some. Recall was crisp for others. The investigation memorialized statements from 7 people who say Nash admitted to setting the blaze. It happened while he was hospitalized from a motorcycle crash not long after the fire. Most of those potential witnesses decades ago first shared with the investigators what they were told. The detective's interest in the young Nash waned after he agreed to a police interview and a polygraph not long after the fire. Atwood brought fresh eyes and the rigor of a meticulous investigation to unlock secrets and recover evidence that otherwise would have been lost to the years. Based on the new information, ATF assigned an agent who is an arson expert to assist in the investigation. She challenged assumptions. She also made certain that the 1987 determination that the fire was deliberately set remains forensically sound today. The effort included examining the buried foundations of the former library, which still bear scorch marks from the blaze 34 years ago. Atwood and Irving also interviewed serial arsonist Keller, who, after years of rebuffing detectives, agreed to sit down and talk. As he has always done, Keller denied any involvement in the EVCC fire. For 12,456 days, Gary's widow was left to wonder. So too were friends, family, and fellow firefighters, including those whose helmets began to melt as they retreated from an inferno that proved impossible to tame from the inside. On the morning of March 25th, 2021, in a Snohomish County courtroom a little more than 2 miles from where the fatal fire raged. Long-denied suspicions were confirmed and became public record. Nash, a recently released convict with a long criminal history, pleaded guilty to first-degree slaying in the case. County prosecuting attorney Adam Cornell described the patience and tenacity it took to reach the point of filing criminal charges. He said, "The investigation reminds us that the flames of justice are not easily extinguished, and that perseverance has a way of rewarding those who choose not to give up." Nash was then a troubled 12-year-old boy who struck the match during a burglary at the library and then dropped it on a pile of books and papers on the floor of the college's library, igniting a fast-moving blaze before he disappeared into the night. He once set a couch on fire in his home. One of Nash's friends, himself then still a teen, also was questioned about the EVCC fire after family reported that he was claiming to have had a vision of how the blaze started. His story included details about the fire's origins, information that at the time was not widely shared. Other witnesses placed 3 young men, including Nash, outside their North Everett homes within minutes of the fire starting at the college. The teen who claimed to have had a vision about the fire went to prison a few years later after being convicted of playing a role in an unrelated case. Nash, meanwhile, was cycling in and out of prison, amassing at least 14 adult felony convictions. In court papers, he is described as never having held a regular job outside of prison or while on work release. Family members of Gary Parks, his wife, Kathy Parks, daughters Erin Vanry and Jennifer Parks, as well as grandchildren, watched a remote broadcast feed as the day of reckoning finally arrived. Also monitoring the proceedings were detectives and at least one retired Everett firefighter. Through his attorney, Nash said that he was knowingly and voluntarily admitting his guilt. Defense attorney Philip Sales told Judge David Kurtz, "This is a well-thought-out deal. It is not something that happened overnight." In plea negotiations, the prosecution and defense agreed to recommend a sentence lower than the standard sentencing range. Sales said that Nash understands that the judge does not have to follow the recommendation. His standard sentencing range as an adult would be 34 to 45 years in prison. Under a plea agreement that considers he was a child at the time, Nash faces more than 3 years in prison. Toward the end of the half-hour arraignment, Judge Kurtz asked Nash, "What is your plea?" Then came the words the firefighter's family had so long awaited. "Guilty, Your Honor." Judge David Kurtz sentenced Nash to 10 years in prison on May 13th, as well as community custody for the rest of his life once he is released. In doing so, the judge went above the 3.5 to 4.5 years the defense and prosecution were seeking in sentencing recommendations within the standard range for juveniles for first degree in 1987. Kurtz said he had an obligation to consider Nash's age at the time of the crime, but also his lengthy criminal record and the safety of the community. Kurtz said, "Today, the court is sentencing a grown man who sadly appears to have not fully grown up." Family, friends, and firefighters had urged the judge to sentence Nash to prison for much longer than the original plea deal called for. They wanted decades to life. The standard sentencing range, had he committed the same crime as an adult, was 34 to 45 years in prison.